A pixel-perfect nightmare. When smartphone technology goes too far. A short story written and performed by Jordan Krumbine. Part 1. The Appleseed smartphone, powered by CloudOptics technology. Never settle for less than perfect. Appleseed smartphones are powered by CloudOptic technology, a revolutionary camera system designed to take the perfect shot every time. If it's perfect, it's Appleseed. The two halves of the box were so snug, they created a vacuum. Johnny's fingertips struggled to grip the premium pale green cardboard. Finally, with a gentle hiss, the near impenetrable vacuum gave way. Johnny slipped aside a thin layer of matching pale green foam to reveal a sheet of black glass underneath. Before he could even touch the gadget, the screen winked to life. That same shade of pale green brightened the screen, and bold, friendly letters announced, "Hello, welcome to your new Appleseed smartphone." A melodic tone played as the message animated off the screen. Johnny lifted the smartphone from its cradle and wasn't at all surprised to feel his face stretch into a wide, stupid grin. The phone felt absolutely perfect in Johnny's hand. Not too big, not too small. The back curved gently to fit his cupped hand. It was a smooth, pale green plastic that somehow felt more premium than its glass counterparts. The volume and power buttons were solid, clicky, and visually accentuated with a deep emerald hue. Although the phone looked and felt great, its physical design was hardly the main attraction. A new message appeared on the display that stretched seamlessly to the edges of the device. Those same friendly letters pronounced, "Your world is about to change. Say hello to the camera that gets better with every photo you take." An animated graphic played across the screen. It showcased a set of camera modules hidden beneath the screen at the top of the phone. Text explained, "Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. Appleseed uses cutting-edge display and camera technology to make your selfies shine." The animation rotated to display the rear of the phone, and Johnny turned the physical device over in his hand to look at the impressive 6-camera module arranged in a circular bump. He flipped it back around to read the text, even though he knew the marketing-friendly copy by heart. It's not just evolutionary, it's revolutionary. The Appleseed camera system is powered by CloudOptics technology. We could explain how the algorithm and AI processing function making it virtually impossible to take a bad photo. But it's easier if you just start snapping. We think you'll agree. Technology has never been so magical. Johnny's smartwatch pinged as the next message transitioned across the Appleseed display. The watch notification was a calendar reminder for dinner with his family. He'd have to leave in a few minutes to get there on time. Johnny swiped through the last message on the smartphone. "Let's get you set up," and quickly ran through the steps to initialize his new phone. He hated to rush through it because there was nothing better than setting up new technology. Time was short, though, and Johnny would rather have the Appleseed with him at dinner than wait until much later in the evening to play with his new toy. It was fair to say that Johnny loved technology, smartphones and camera tech doubly so. After a shitty week involving the most heartbreaking betrayal the 19-year-old had ever experienced, all it took was the comforting heft of a new smartphone for Johnny to feel like things were finally starting to turn around. Part 2. The Perfect Family Selfie. Every time you take a picture, the camera is actually shooting a burst of photos. The primary rear camera captures anywhere from 20 to 60 photos, and the additional cameras, they're all different focal lengths, and they capture different sets of details in the frame. The software, that is the CloudOptics AI, that's the magic sauce that renders all the information together, so before you finish saying cheese, you've taken the best photo of your life. Beyond all the raw computational elements, the camera actually starts capturing data before you even tap the shutter button. So if someone is blinking or not smiling or your hand shakes, the camera already has the data to best render your photo. Johnny desperately wanted to keep talking, but he could tell he had already lost his audience. Mom and Dad were barely feigning polite interest. Johnny's little sister, Janie, had not once looked up from her own phone, a generic Android with a cracked screen that seemed permanently connected to an external battery pack. Dad licked barbecue sauce off his fingers before reaching across the table for a roll of paper towels. He said, backhanding his mouth as he tore off a few sheets. "And is that one of the classes you're taking? Smartphone, camera, photography?" Johnny let out a frustrated sigh as his gaze dropped to a half-eaten brisket sandwich. It sat on a bed of fries in a red plastic basket that had come out of the kitchen sticky. Dad was about as blue-collar as they came. He had no college degree and managed a gas station convenience store. He wouldn't know an f-stop from a train stop if the train came straight through his living room. "You're thinking of computational photography, Dad," Johnny said, unable to hide a disappointed frown. "But If it's not a traditional camera like a DSLR or mirrorless, colleges don't really like to acknowledge what they think of as fringe photographic technology. I thought Ashley was supposed to be coming tonight, Mom interjected. Johnny glanced back up to see Mom inspecting a large, dry-rubbed spare rib for a point of entry. She decided to tackle it from the middle out and sank her teeth into the meat. Johnny pulled his face into a neutral expression, silently fearing that even a blank face would reveal too much. Another glance at Janie. She was too preoccupied with her phone to pay attention to the conversation, much less her own basket of untouched barbecue meat. What is she studying again? Dad asked with a quick look at Mom. Nursing? Mm-hmm. Mom chewed a mouthful of pork while she winked at her son. Someone needs to be careful Ashley doesn't find out she's a little too good for our little camera nerd. Johnny took a large bite out of his sandwich to avoid speaking. Another glance at Janie. Honestly, would it kill her to help buffer the parentals, if only for a minute? The last thing Johnny wanted to explain was how he had spent the previous week sleeping over at Ashley's because his own roommate was a chronic pothead who couldn't stop dealing from their dorm room. A day earlier, Johnny had learned that Ashley was taking advantage of Johnny's absence from his dorm to hook up with said pothead roommate. They had taken Netflix and chill to all new highs, and Johnny was left with both of his thumbs planted firmly up his own asshole. But sure, Mom, Ashley was too good for him. Johnny racked his brain as he overchewed his food, wishing a neutral conversation topic would magically fall in his lap. He looked down at his new Appleseed smartphone, sitting face down next to the sticky plastic basket. The massive array of camera lenses met his gaze with cold, silent understanding. Johnny's life was infinitely better when he was on the other side of the lens. Have you seen how those assholes in Washington want to cancel student debt? Dad asked, lobbing the political conversation starter like it was a crudely improvised pipe bomb. What the hell am I doing, busting my ass 60 hours a week if those guys are just handing out a free ride to all the snot-nosed shitheads who can't manage their finances? Mom side-eyed her husband. Language, please? Dad rolled his eyes as Johnny used a pair of crinkle-cut fries to scoop a dollop of ketchup into his mouth. He chewed way too slowly, buying himself more buffer time. No one can argue the fact that if the other guy won, Dad continued, almost as if he wished the conversational pipe bomb was more on the scale of a nuclear WMD, the economy would be in a much better place right now, and people wouldn't be begging and sucking at the tit of the welfare state. Johnny would have preferred it if his brain had found anything else to latch onto. Instead, what about all that corporate welfare our taxes had already paid for? What about the banks and Fortune 500 companies already bailed out by taxpayers? Why do you think people are begging for help in the first place? You realize, Dad, these programs would actually help you end your 60-hour work week, right? The Appleseed camera module stared silently up at Johnny. He could literally be anywhere else right now, taking pictures with his new phone. Anywhere else. Johnny, how are classes? Fuck. Could the change of topic be anything other than how he was flunking out of college? Good, Mom, Johnny lied. She nodded slowly, waiting for more. Yeah? Yeah, Mom, good. Aside from the inexplicable white noise that filled Johnny's brain whenever he sat in a classroom, aside from the total lack of real-world photographic coursework, aside from the educational institution's arrogant blinders toward modern-day advances in imaging technology. Johnny learned more about computational photography from Appleseed's CloudOptics webpage than he ever did in a college classroom. Could they possibly talk about anything other than school, politics, or Dad's 60-hour work week? He just gives and he gives and he gives. No, of course not. Johnny shared no common interests with his parents, and they seemed to have an impossible time engaging with him about technology and photography. Well, then, Mom said, wiping her fingers on a wet nap. How about we see how good that new camera is with a family selfie? You know what they say. This dinner never actually happened if I don't post about it on Facebook. Sweet Jesus, finally. Johnny swallowed the last lump of well-chewed barbecue and started nodding. It was one thing to tell his parents about new technology, but to show them. After wiping his own fingers, Johnny grabbed the Appleseed and twisted in his chair. He held the phone up and away from the table, aiming the selfie camera at his family. Dad mugged while Mom elbowed Janie to look at the camera. The framing was too tight, but Johnny already knew that. Okay, now watch this, Johnny said, holding the phone but not pressing any buttons. On the Appleseed screen, green digital squares appeared and started tracking each of their faces. As soon as Janie glanced up from her own phone, a square appeared over her face. And then the entire picture shifted to a much wider angle to complement the larger shot. See, the AI recognized all the people in the selfie and automatically switched to the wider lens. Dad gave an exaggerated scoff. Or we could just have the waitress take the photo. Johnny ignored the comment, his thumb hovering over the shutter button. Now pay attention to how the lighting looks, because it's absolutely horrible in here. The barbecue restaurant was dimly lit. A metal light fixture hung over the table, casting unflattering shadows across all their faces. Are you sure you don't need a flash? Mom asked, oblivious to the fact that the CloudOptics technology eliminated the need for flashes. As Johnny's thumb dropped to the screen to tap the shutter button, a server dropped a tray on the other side of the dining room. Johnny's head whipped in the direction of the clatter as the Appleseed captured the photo. On the screen, Mom, Dad, and Janie's faces cycled rapidly, It looked as if their heads were those blank animatronics at a theme park with animated faces projection mapped onto their surfaces. Each of their faces fluttered through a range of expressions and degrees of smiles. Dad went from frowning to smiling to a big belly guffaw. Mom cycled from confused to something warm and welcoming. Janie's mouth shifted with each cycle, but her eyes stayed empty and vacant with each AI-manipulated expression. There were endless degrees of variations as the faces fluttered and processed. Johnny glanced back at the Appleseed screen. In the fraction of a second that had passed, the AI-processed photo flicked onto the screen. It was bright and sharp, the algorithm vanquishing offensive shadows and evening out the exposure. The detail was crisp, right down to the scraps of barbecue remaining in the sticky red baskets. Mom, Dad, and Janie looked like a warm, happy family excited to share a dinner. The camera had performed even better than advertised, except... "Guess Johnny's got a face that even his computer camera doesn't like," Dad said with a chuckle. Johnny frowned. His entire head was a blur in the photo because he had turned toward the crashing tray. But that didn't make sense. The algorithm should have picked up a frame from before Johnny tapped the shutter when he was smiling at the camera. The other strange detail was when he turned, the camera moved ever so slightly, shifting Janie to the very edge of the frame. Half of Janie's face was removed from the photo. Again, the algorithm should have corrected for that with the pre-rolled data. "Look at how that color pops, though," Mom said. "Text me the photo so I can post it." Dad nodded. "Yeah, I'll give you that much. That whole camera switcheroo thing was pretty clever." Johnny sunk back in his chair, confused. Algorithms and artificial intelligence weren't perfect, but those two details should have been a no-brainer. He was about to try for a second shot when Dad got up from the table. Algorithmic glitches aside, dinner with the family was, thankfully, blissfully, over. Part 3. The Lady in Red. After a series of awkward goodbye hugs in the restaurant parking lot, Johnny parted ways with his family. He unlocked the door to this side of ancient, faded purple geo-tracker before hesitating. Something had caught his eye on the street corner just beyond the parking lot. A tall, curvy blonde wearing a shimmering red dress stood in a cone of yellow light. The light was coming from the overhead street lamp and had an antiseptic quality to it. The blonde was turned away from Johnny, hand on her hip, and he could plainly see how tightly the dress clung to her curves. She turned her head, and those long, soft blonde strands shifted against the bare skin of her exposed back. A sliver of a pale jawline came into view, and Johnny found himself reaching for his phone. A long exposure of this lady in red, with the glowing lights of moving traffic streaked across the background, would be a stunning composition. Johnny lifted the Appleseed, aiming that rear-facing 6-lens camera module at the lady in red. His eyes shifted from the lady on the street corner to the phone's display. Unexpectedly, Johnny's breath caught in his throat. Looking through the Appleseed's lens, the cone of yellow light under the street lamp was empty. Traffic streamed by on the street. The lady in red was no longer in the shot. Johnny looked past his phone to the street corner and, sure enough, no one was there. He glanced right and left. His field of view was wide and there was nowhere for the lady in red to disappear. Certainly not in the split second it took him to look from the street corner to his phone. But she was gone. Vanished. Almost as if she had been winked from existence? It didn't make any sense, and what made matters worse was that Johnny had zero history of seeing anomalies? Apparitions? He didn't know how to classify the lady in red. She had looked so real. Johnny reached for the geo-tracker's flip-style door handle and found himself immediately reassured and grounded by the molded plastic underneath his fingertips. He pulled the door open while looking back at the street corner, wondering if the lady might mysteriously reappear. A car horn tooted behind him, and Johnny snapped back to reality. He turned to see his dad's project car, a cherry red Cadillac DeVille from the 1980s. Mom's arm was waving out the passenger window, and Janie sat in the back seat, face down in her phone. "You okay there, Space Cadet?" Mom asked. "I've been talking to you for a few minutes." Johnny rubbed a hand over his mouth, confused. Mom waved it off. "I was saying that we are long overdue for upgrades, and you should come over and help us order some of those fancy new camera phones." Dad leaned over and grinned. "There'll be ice cream." Mom smiled and winked. "I've got your favorite, dairy-free mint chocolate chip, the green kind, not the white." Dad waved his hands in the air and put on a terrible impression of Jim Gaffigan. "His little tummy can't handle that spicy milk." Mom waved her hand. "Come on, meet us back at the house and we'll buy some phones." Johnny didn't know what to say, and, for once, it wasn't because he was desperate to avoid conversational landmines. Despite the encyclopedic volumes of things they didn't have in common, his parents were actually trying. Part 4. The Perfect Family. His spoon clinked against an empty bowl. streaks of green and black smeared the inside, and Johnny resisted the urge to use his finger to squeegee up the residual remains of the mint chocolate chip ice cream. Mom had drowned the dessert in chocolate syrup and topped it off with a generous dollop of dairy-free whipped cream. It was even better than he had hoped, dumb jokes about spicy milk aside. Johnny was sitting at the kitchen table with his mother. She set aside Johnny's empty ice cream bowl so he could turn his full attention to the family laptop. It was an old, clunky computer that would have worked better as a blunt object to smash over the head of a home invader. Still, the web browser worked just fine, albeit at the speed of a sedated tortoise. Johnny had the Appleseed website up, and after walking Mom and Dad through color and storage options, he added 2 smartphones to the shopping cart. Johnny hesitated before advancing to payment options. Janie's Android is older than dirt. I know these things aren't cheap, but her birthday is coming up. Did you want to get an extra one for her? Dad was walking the empty ice cream bowls to the sink and exchanged a confused look with his wife. Mom chuckled nervously. Johnny, what? Who's Janie? Dad asked, running the tap to rinse out the bowls. Wait, are you talking about Ashley? Mom asked, putting a hand on Johnny's arm. Oh, no. Did you 2 break up? Are you already seeing someone new? Johnny shook his head, perplexed. No, no, Janie. Who's Janie? Dad asked again from the sink. Johnny felt his stomach drop. He looked at Mom, who had nothing but genuine confusion in her eyes. She smiled nervously at him. Janie, Johnny insisted, a sour black panic twisting in his stomach. Your daughter! Dad barked a laugh as he loaded the bowls into the dishwasher. Okay, see, now we've got an aspiring comedian. Johnny felt his head filling with that same white noise he experienced while sitting in his college classrooms. Janie, he repeated. Her face is glued to her phone. We shared a room until I was 13. She's right over... Johnny gestured to the hallway and Janie's room at the far end of it. Mom pulled Johnny's arm down and frowned at him. Sweetie, this isn't funny. Are you okay? She asked quietly. The buzz in his ears grew louder, and the sour panic clawed its way up from his belly, stabbing at Johnny's heart. I'm not trying to be funny. He remembered the selfie from the restaurant. Johnny grabbed the Appleseed and tapped open the camera roll. Look, we just took a photo with our... The picture from the barbecue dinner filled the screen, and Johnny felt all the oxygen suddenly vanish from the room. At first glance, it looked almost exactly the same as when he took it. Mom and Dad were smiling warmly, and Johnny's head was a blur from turning toward the sound of the crash. On closer inspection, however, instead of Janie being half-cropped from the photo, she simply wasn't there. The image was more aesthetically balanced for it, as if the CloudOptics algorithm had intentionally erased Janie from the picture in order to make a more perfect composition. Johnny pinched at the photo, zooming into the space that Janie had occupied. Even her sticky basket of untouched barbecue was gone. "This isn't possible," Johnny muttered, his head slowly rocking side to side. Dad had come up behind him and now placed his hands on Johnny's shoulders, admiring the photo. "That shot really did come out great. It's nice to get the whole family in one photo and not have it look like it was taken in the 80s. Johnny could feel his stomach souring. Dropping his Appleseed to the table, he shrugged away from his father's grip and stood up. Johnny crossed to the living room and over to the mantel where family photos were arranged. Surely there had to be... A black and white portrait of each family member was spaced across the mantel. Smaller group shots from birthdays and vacations filled the gaps between the three larger frames. Janie wasn't in any of them. Johnny started muttering to himself as the white noise buzzed louder in his ears. His parents called to him, but they sounded muffled and distant. He turned to the hallway and started for Janie's room. The door was shut. This can't be happening. This can't be real. And he flung it open, expecting to find her lying on the bed, face buried in her phone, earbuds blocking out her pestering parents and annoying older brother. Instead, he found an ironing board alongside a treadmill with clothes hanging from the handrails. On the other side of the ironing board was a stationary recumbent cycle whose seat was lost under a pile of clothes to be ironed. A small television sat against the far wall. There was no sign that Janie ever lived in the room. There was no sign that Janie ever existed. The periphery of Johnny's vision started to blur, and chromatic aberrations began shifting colors along the furthest edges. Laughter cut through the buzzing in Johnny's ears. He turned and stumbled back to the kitchen. Dad was holding the Appleseed and was showing Mom the screen. What the hell is going on?" Johnny asked from the hallway, bracing himself against the wall. It felt like the hallway was spinning. "Language," Mom said automatically before answering. "Your dad tried to take one of those really long photos." Johnny blinked, his brain turning over on itself, working like sludge. A panorama? Dad held the phone out to Johnny, showing him the screen. Johnny squinted at the wide photo shrunk tiny in portrait orientation. "Oscar started walking through the kitchen as he took the picture," Mom explained with a chuckle. Oscar? In the photo, Johnny saw a small dachshund that the panorama's computational stitching had stretched into a 6-foot-long monster wiener dog. Johnny turned a confused gaze from his smirking dad to his amused mom. "But," Johnny wheezed, When did you get a dog?" On cue, Oscar, the wiener dog, yipped and trotted out from around the corner. His short black hair was shiny and he had brown patches on his snout and feet. Johnny stumbled backward into the wall, a primal horror gripping his throat and suffocating him. The dog kept trotting toward him, all 6 feet of the thing. It was as if his parents had grabbed either end of a dachshund filled with silly putty and just stretched. "What the fuck?" Johnny hissed, oblivious to the words coming out of his mouth. "Johnny, language!" Mom said with a disapproving glance. Before Johnny could object, if he couldn't drop the F-bomb when a mutant dachshund crossed his path, when the actual fuck would the word ever be appropriate? The doorbell rang. Dad brightened and handed the Appleseed back to Johnny. He started for the front door. "Well, that'll be the new phones." But we didn't even finish." Johnny trailed off as he looked at the kitchen table. The family laptop was still sitting there, the Appleseed shopping cart still on the screen. Dad opened the door to a 20-something in glasses, skinny jeans, and a pale green Appleseed t-shirt. The Appleseed geek handed him a small, pale green shopping bag with nylon handles. None of it made any sense, and the harder Johnny grasped for logic, the faster it slipped away. The chromatic aberration, shifting colors at the edge of his vision, had grown stronger. Oscar, the monster dachshund, split into a red, green, and blue dog before melting back into one super stretch limo model of a wiener dog. Memories of Janie felt like they were glitching out of Johnny's head. 1 minute he could remember her clearly at the barbecue restaurant, and the next, she was gone, erased from existence. Okay, but that was dinner. When was the last time Johnny had seen his little sister? When was the last time they had caught up? Hadn't they had a semi-decent relationship before she lost herself in that dumb Android phone? What about the holidays? Family vacations, how they used to stay up late as kids watching old episodes of The Twilight Zone. A sharp pain stabbed at Johnny's temple. He cradled his head as waves of nausea turned his stomach. The room felt like it was spinning violently around him, colors shifting and glitching. The dog kept yipping. Mom and Dad were laughing, pointing their new phones at each other and snapping photos before turning to Johnny and taking pictures of him. Johnny could feel the penetrating gaze of the combined 12 lenses trained on him, peering into and violating something deep in his core. He yanked his head up. The white noise sounded like a goddamn ocean in his ears. Pixelated artifacts flickered across the furniture and walls. After they took their photos, Mom and Dad showed off each perfect snapshot, holding their new phones out for Johnny to see. Sharp Explosive pain stabbed through his head, and his brain felt like it was splitting in two. Johnny grimaced in agony, and yet he wasn't grimacing in any one of the photos. There wasn't a hint of pain or a shadow of a frown. Every photo his parents took of him showed a happy, laughing, and bright-eyed 19-year-old. Every photo was perfect, right down to the last pixel. Johnny's mouth fell open, and an otherworldly moan of terror spilled out. The house glitched furiously around him, pulsing in a dissonant frequency that matched the tremors in his cry. He pushed past his parents, flinging open the front door before stopping abruptly. Tommy? The face staring back at Johnny was familiar in all the wrong ways. It was nearly identical to Johnny's, just older. Johnny would have recognized his older brother anywhere, despite a small corner of his brain screaming at him, rebelling against the reality he could plainly see with his own two eyes. Johnny didn't have an older brother. Tommy flashed a perfect white smile and pointed at the Appleseed clutched in his younger brother's hand. "Hey, we've got the same phone!" "Tommy, you made it! I am so glad to see you! We've got ice cream!" Mom called out. "Hold the spicy milk!" Dad piped. Tommy stepped around his younger brother. Johnny's eyes bugged as he moaned, "What the fucking hell is going on?" Mom, Dad, and Tommy turned and said in perfect unison, "Language, Johnny!" It was like a punch in the gut, and Johnny stumbled backward out the front door and onto the porch. His mother stepped into the doorway. "You know, Johnny," she said, raising a stern finger, "you really should be more like your older brother." "I don't have an older brother. Who the fuck is that?" "And bad language is the sign of bad brains. Intelligent people don't use those kinds of words, Johnny." Dad joined Mom in the doorway. Like a shitty fucking video edit, Tommy glitched into view alongside them. All three smiled at Johnny, faces frozen in masks of inhuman perfection. "Where's Jamie?" Johnny asked, his voice wavering and cracking. "What happened to Janie?" "You really should be more like your older brother," Mom repeated. Tommy's blank eyes seemed to grow as his smile stretched. The chromatic aberrations were spreading, shifting colors all around Johnny as he backed down the steps of the porch and into the front yard. A pixelated glitch rippled like a wave across the front of the family house. A second later, the home Johnny grew up in split into 3 different buildings. 1 red, 1 green, 1 blue. The 3 houses overlapped, wavered, and then burst into glitches before settling back into the single, full-spectrum house. Johnny kept stumbling backward into the street. He looked up at the night sky and saw strange artifacts distorting the stars. It was like a low-resolution JPEG that couldn't render the finer details. He pressed the balls of his hands into his eyes, but he could still see the strange, pixelated artifacts behind his eyelids. In a moment of sickening clarity, Johnny realized it wasn't the world glitching around him. It was him. Johnny turned a circle in the silent street of his parents' perfect suburban neighborhood. He looked down at himself and saw the apparition in full effect. The edges of his body glowed in RGB hues. A sinking sensation started in his stomach before winding its way up into Johnny's chest, pulling at his throat. The roaring buzz in his ears abruptly stopped, and Johnny was left with nothing but the crushing weight of an impossible silence. No traffic, no wind, no insects, just nothing. His head felt like it was going to cave in on itself. Something was very, very wrong. Icy fear clutched Johnny's heart, and pure terror spidered down his spine. Johnny took a step back toward the family home, his trembling hand reaching out to the 3 people standing in the doorway. He stumbled. Something was missing? He looked down at his foot, but it was barely there, glitching in and out of reality with tiny explosions of red, green, and blue artifacts. His other foot glitched, and Johnny staggered to his knees. Mommy! Before he could say another word, Johnny's entire mouth glitched away. It was as if it had been erased by some cruel Photoshop of reality. Johnny was no longer capable of calling out or crying for help. Never mind the conversational landmines. Never mind the things they didn't have in common. Never mind Janie. Johnny's eyes locked with his mother's. His brows furrowed in a desperate, pleading horror, silently begging her to, please, please, please. Johnny's Appleseed smartphone clattered to the pavement. Mom, Dad, and Tommy stood unmoving in the doorway. The street sat silent. Like a switch being flipped, Mom perked up, turning from Dad to Tommy. You know, I cannot remember the last time we all took a photo together. Mom winked at her son. And you are looking absolutely perfect tonight, Tommy.